Yeah, so I'm from this very small country up north, Denmark, that legalized medical cannabis as a pilot program back in 2018. And just want to introduce you to sort of what it is, some of the learnings that we have, and how that might potentially influence the rest of Europe. And also a few reflections that we have in that regard. Um, if we look at the company that we are and the player, so you kind of understand where we're coming from. I mean, we were actually founded just a year before cannabis became legal in the country, and we were founded with the sole purpose of being part of the pilot program in Denmark, which is medical cannabis. And then actually already in 2018, we actually became a public traded company, and we're trading on NASDAQ in Copenhagen. We were one of the first companies in the country to have all the different licenses to operate from the Danish Medicine Agency. And anyone that has operations in medical cannabis know there's quite a few that you need, and you need to be very precise on each of that. So I think I'm my family, and especially my children, has been pretty proud that I'm one of the very few people in Denmark that can actually legally handle medical cannabis, which is in the old days categorized as the most important narcotics drugs that we have, and there's not a lot of people like that around in Denmark, so I have a very unique certificate. So they found that very cool. These days it's probably more normal. So to understand where I'm talking from, we are only looking at prescription-based medical cannabis. So like CBD for novel food, that's not in our area of expertise. And we have also only been focusing on oil products because we, from the very start, decided that our mission in life was to try and make medical cannabis or cannabis a typical drug in the same sense as you see from most other traditional drugs in the marketplace, because it's so stigmatized. So we felt that we wanted to kind of over-exaggerate and be very pharmaceutical. And doctors, at least in Denmark, didn't really go to university for 7 years to prescribe joints in their clinic. So kind of just making a joke of that, but that's actually how doctors in Denmark are thinking about cannabis to a very high degree. And we are operating in 6 different countries today. The way that we are working as we actually have 2 pillars in our strategy. First, we are sourcing finished products from kind of very high quality manufacturers around the world. We have some in Canada, we have some in Australia, and then we also have our own indoor cultivation facility that has the ambitions to become kind of the pharma reference of how to produce medical cannabis to kind of supply that raw ingredients to the pharma industry in the future. If we look at the Danish pilot program, because this is kind of important to understand this program, because quite a lot of other countries have been influenced or inspired by the Danish pilot program. For example, the pilot program that you see in Ireland is to a very high degree a copy-paste from the Danish pilot program. We have also, as a company, been invited into the European work on how to standardize the different monographs, first on flower, and now we've been invited to join how to develop a monograph for oils, extracts. So all the learnings that we have in the Danish pilot program are recognized as being something that is worth sharing. The whole idea with the pilot program was actually the politician, of course, from pressure from patients, that we should create a new industry. And Denmark has always been a farming country, so agriculture has been the biggest industry for hundreds of years. So why not introduce this new plant called cannabis and see if we could make an export business out of that for the country. So that's how it all got started. But the politicians also decided we want to set a new standard for medical cannabis, because they were still worried about the stigmatization that the society and certainly doctors has. So they put in a lot of strict requirements with the sole purpose of securing patient safety. And I'm mentioning just a few, just to give you sort of a flavor, because of course the list is much longer than that. This is much more complex than you see from this very basic slide. But one thing that always amazes people when I talk to people in Canada or Australia or even in Germany, we have this zero tolerance for pesticides, and everyone says, yeah, we have the same. But when I say zero, it actually means zero. We don't, like Canada, have a positive list of pesticides that you are legally allowed to use. Or if the pesticide disappears in the extraction process, you can't measure it in the lab COA at the end of the process, it's all okay. You actually need to document all the way from the mother room and from the flowers that goes into the extraction that no pesticides were used, even though they're going to disappear in the extraction process. So it's a really high tolerance to meet. Of course, we also need TACP, GMP, and all that good stuff, so that's nothing new. But what is really important is that when you want to have a product approved by the Danish Medicine Agency, it's actually a very similar process that we have compared to traditional medicine. So we submit a huge documentation package that actually documents, of course, TACP, GMP, and one example is, okay, so if you have this extract and you have this COA result on the final product, of course, that's good. I also want to have the same documentation and test results on the extract, and I also want to have the same study and results on the flower that went into the extract that became the oil. So we are actually going through all the different phases in the approval process, and every time we import or sell a new product, we need to document this for the authorities. So there's a lot of extra things in that. Also, if you need to declare the strains that you have, and if you change it for any reason, you figure out, hey, production-wise, I should change my strain because there's something with this strain that is not really giving me the yield that I'm looking for. Well, if you change the strain, it's a new product, and the authorization we have just is cancelled. We've also seen that over the time that the requirements for quality has increased and increased and increased. One way of seeing it, if you think about the product specification that you get approved with the product, when we had the first product approved 6 years ago, there was an acceptable deviation from the specification of 15% plus minus. Now, then a year later, it went down to 10% plus minus. And the latest product we had approved this year had a plus minus 5% deviation. And you say, well, I mean, that's just pharmaceutical product. Yes, it is. But if you have ever tried to cultivate a live plant, I mean, try and tell it that it needs to stay within the 5% plus minus. It's a challenge. And this is also why we have an indoor cultivation facility, because we think you need extreme control with all conditions to actually meet these very strict requirements. So this gives you sort of an idea of the requirements that is part of what Europe is, and this is what a lot of the other medicine agencies in Europe are listening to. So we've had visitors coming in from all over Europe to meet with the Danish Medicine Agency, and sometimes they also want to meet a manufacturer or a supplier and we often get to meet those companies that comes into Denmark, and they're pretty amazed that this is actually something that is a requirement for the industry. If you look at the Danish laws today, it's in two parts. We are still, the part that treats Danish patients is a trial program that ends at the end of 2025, meaning at that point the politician needs to figure out how does permanent legalization looks like for Danish patients. There's still a risk that they might say, well, we'll go back to the Middle Ages again and only have illegal cannabis available for Danish patients. That's still an option. So we don't know at this point in time. But the second part of the Danish legalization today is that production and cultivation has permanently been legalized. So that's a good news, especially when you invested a lot of money in a facility like we did, that even though Danish patients cannot benefit potentially from our product, we can still export it to the rest of the world. So that's kind of the Danish program. So what can we learn? Actually, I just want to show you sort of an interesting fun fact from the Danish market. This is how the annual revenue, or actually it's the quarterly revenue, has developed since we introduced the medical cannabis pilot program. And you see the black line is the total market. It's growing. It's not growing like a lot of people projected it would. And if you sort of look at 4 quarters, the total annual revenue in Denmark is 9 million euros. So it's not a big number. It's actually a very small number. And then if you break that down, what kind of products are actually selling for that 9 million euros? And it's actually products like Epidiolex and Sativix, that is the leading type of product that is leading the market in Denmark. And then the second in line is a few very licensed, specialized pharmacies that do medicinal products. So it tells us that even though we've had a pilot program for 6-7 years, it's still the old traditional products with cannabis in it that are leading the market. And if you look at medical cannabis products like you see across the German market, the UK market, all those products, if they were ever to enter the Danish market and have approval to be sold, they would all be in the third category, being the pilot program. So those products will be down there in that line, fighting for the smallest share of the revenue. So it tells you that there's a long way to go before we really hit the jackpot from a business point of view. So what's the positive side? I mean, I've been saying it's almost impossible and don't do it. But of course, there's a lot of interesting opportunities with medical cannabis, even in Denmark. Very interestingly, the Danish Health Ministry, they have actually did some data where they have been looking at what happened with different types of patients before and after medical cannabis was introduced. And here you sort of see how many were treated with neuropathic pain before medical cannabis was introduced and then after. And you see there's actually a saving of 14%. So there's actually a pretty strong business case from a health perspective on the health budget on a national scale to save a lot of costs. So I think this is one of the great things, because this is going to be the leverage when the politicians are going to think about, should we introduce medical cannabis as a traditional alternative treatment for patients? And I mean, money talks also for politicians, and all health budgets around Europe or the world are under pressure. So this is kind of a really nice finding. Also, what we can say, we have the permanent legalization of production in Denmark, which is good. It's an open program, so it's not like other European countries where there was a limited number of licenses that you could apply for. Once they have been applied for, sorry, you didn't make it. But here it's unlimited, so 200 people or 200 companies can join the program tomorrow if they so decide. initially there was like 30, 35 companies with a license in Denmark. We are down to 8 now. And also, if you get a license, there's no limit. So you can produce 100 tons, 200 tons, whatever you want to produce every single year. The authorities, they don't care. It's your problem, because if you can't sell it, you'll have to destroy it. So in that way, there's a lot of opportunities to use Denmark as a hub for Europe. And here you see some of the really professional and capable companies in Denmark right now that are cultivating. So it's kind of where we see the big guys are entering. We've also seen some of the big international guys leaving, but I'll get back to that in a second, because there's also a few challenges that's worth knowing about. The regulation from a quality point of view and from a legalization point of view is still a moving target. The example of going from 15 to 10 to 5% is one small example, but we see that every time we have a new product in review and for approval by the medicine agency, across the requirements, we see that they are increasing the requirements on standard and documentation. So I think the first product we had approved 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the dossier were probably like this, 100 pages. Now it's like this. So it's just, it is exploding. And of course, the investment in preparing and working with that type of documentation is a challenge. We also see, like we see in most countries that we serve, that products are similar. If you have a THC 30, 25 or 20, it's the same. It's just a matter of how you use the dosing. So it's difficult to have your own positioning in the market. So that's something that we see in all markets. And of course, it's small, there's a low growth. And it's really because we see that the doctors are the bottleneck. I mean, they are the gatekeepers because they are the guys that need to write the prescriptions, and they don't have the skills, they don't have the education, and some of them don't even have the willingness to do so. So there's a need for education and for improving their competences. And then what we've seen, I mean, we entered the market in 2017 and we went the IPO way and became a public company. But time to market is several years. So return on investment has been a huge challenge in the Danish pilot program. We've seen some of the key license producers exiting. We've seen companies like Aurora, like Spectrum, which is cannabis growth. And they all got to spend more than probably in the neighborhood of 100 million euros each before they gave up. And they never really managed to get any products into the market. So we have also seen this big hype, and then now we are seeing probably more reality kicking in. So what can we learn from the Danish pilot program? What's the expectation that we see? I mean, it's clear to us that kind of the old school pharma mindset is here to stay, and it will be critical for succeeding in the future. No one knows what the permanent legalization is going to look like. For sure, we think it's going to be more pharmaceutical than it is today. It's never going to be full with phase 1, 2, 3, of course, because that will kill the industry, because we don't have that kind of investment of capital in our industry and probably never will. So that's one part. And then we also need to start thinking about product innovation, because we have too many Me Too products, like I used to call them. So that's the challenge, and we are already starting to see that in the major markets, like in Germany and the UK, and also Australia for that matter, that we need to find a position for each individual producer. we found, looking at the different companies in Denmark that actually survived or even had success, that they started out very conservatively. I mean, the big guys like Aurora and Cannabis, they came in and say, we're going to produce 100 tons a year, probably 200 tons a year, and we're going to have 100 or 1,000 of square meters of grow area. And of course, they invested in all that, and there was no demand. Because the market didn't grow the way that everyone expected. So the guys that are around these days were the one that created a setup where they can align their capacity with the actual demand. So initially, I remember when in our strategy back in 2017, everyone said, you need to have the entire value chain inside the organization because you need to control your capacity. And that was what everyone did around the world. But of course, if you have a huge extraction facility, can you run it every single day, 7 days a week, and have capacity for selling it? So there's things that are changing and have changed that we need to think about. So that's kind of the learnings that I can share from the Danish program. So how would this potentially spill over into Europe and have an impact on the future of medical cannabis in Europe? I hope that the Danish business case with the 14% savings on the national budget, that can be used and reused in other markets, because talking to both politicians, but certainly also the health authorities, if you can talk money and savings, I mean, there's a likelihood they will listen. And you could say, well, these 14% is probably a freak number from Denmark. It's never going to be replicated in any other country in Europe. I've actually seen very similar numbers out of California and Ohio. So it's not like this probably can't be replicated. It can. So it might also be worth considering in Germany and other markets to try and see if you can get data to replicate it, because there's nothing like local data that convinces the local decision makers. I also expect that all the companies that are currently producing and cultivating in Denmark, and future ones to use Denmark as a hub, they will export. So I think Denmark will be a country of export to basically the entire world. I think Germany and Australia is the key markets for Denmark right now, but I think that'll expand. We also see that regulation, I mentioned this briefly in my introduction, that the Danish medicine agencies are involved in creating the monographies for Europe, and Danish companies are also invited to share our input. They've even asked us to send samples of our extracts for this work, so they can actually check for themselves that we are within the plus minus 5%. So you might say, is that going to be reality? Well, we don't know, but they're certainly looking at it. And of course, thinking about how to improve the return on investment. This goes every single day for every one of us, but I think the wisdom of 2016 to 2020, where we wanted to control a large portion of the value chain within our own organization, it's actually a partnership model that is the future in our mind. And we see that in Denmark, where now we have companies only doing extracts. For others, we have GMP packaging facilities for others, so you don't need to have those investment inside. So it's more an ecosystem and partnership model in the future. And there's a lot of beautiful companies around Europe that I've talked to that are very specialized and very capable in their small part of the value chain. And this is certainly a way that we will evolve our business, and our strategy will be in partnership with those types of companies. And then, of course, big is not always beautiful. I remember initially when I got into the industry, I was sitting with some Canadians and the chairman of this fairly successful licensed producer in Canada. He was telling me over dinner, well, I mean, you need to get your hands on a lot of land, because the ones that owns the land, they will have the capacity, and the one with the capacity, they will win the market share and be the winners of the future. And I was kind of listening, and we were coming from the Danish model, say, oh, be careful and don't overdo it and keep capacity low and be able to grow as you increase your demand. So, but I think it's even more true these days that big is not always the beautiful solution to being successful in the medical cannabis industry. So with all this, we've also been in our organization reflecting, so what do we need to do in the future? If this is kind of part of the truth about our industry here in Europe, what needs to happen? And an important part is, of course, product innovation. We need to carve out a unique position for ourselves, for our products. And examples of what that might look like would be a higher, faster onset time for patients that has that need. It could be higher efficacy, higher effect with the products, or it could even be patient convenience in the way that they can use our products. I've taken some examples from Canada. This would never be possible in Europe. People that knows about devices know this is only a dream here in Europe, because you'll never get that medical device approved, or at least it will take you a few years to do so. But also, growing the industry is something that we both as individual players, but also as an industry, need to think about. And it's clear that we need more clinical studies, and we cannot expect the government or the authorities to take ownership of that. So it's down to the industry to do clinical studies. And our thinking is, let's go with some of the rare indications or rare illnesses, because this is where you have an opportunity to be unique with your product. And then, as I said a bit earlier, I mean, educating doctors is so important. I mean, a very small fraction today are able or even capable to give treatment with medical cannabis. So that's an important thing. I wanted to share with you sort of a concrete example how we have been thinking about doing this, because this is very high level, and you say, well, of course, and I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 more minutes. So what we did, we were looking at what happens when you inhale medical cannabis oils. Actually, only 10%, or perhaps even less, makes it through your digestive system and into your bloodstream, where it actually means something. So we needed to find a new solution to bypass the metabolism. And what we did, we have been investing for 5 years in a new oil technology, and we've just tested it on dogs in a PK study that actually shows some really interesting insight. So if you look at the two graphs that I have from that dog study, the lower part, the graph below, that is an ordinary cannabinoid product with MCT oil, that like you see on the market today in Europe. And then the one on the top side, you see the spatial oil technology that we have invested in. It's actually a patented. And there's a few things worth noticing. The first one is, if you look at the scale, the Y scale on the lower one, it goes to 10 and probably a bit more. But then the other scale goes to 1,000. So it tells you that there's, with the same dosing, on the same individual, it's a crossover study, we can actually significantly improve the uptake in the blood with the same type of cannabinoids just by changing the oil technology. What you also see is that each line represents a dog. So down below, the dogs, the lines are very different, meaning each dog had a very different experience with the drug. But on the upper hand side, you see it's very similar. So the dogs are having a similar experience. And this is what doctors really appreciate. They like predictability when they prescribe a drug for their patients. So this is an example of innovation that we think could put the cannabis industry sort of in a new positive light with doctors and the authorities. So just food for thought. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.